I don't know, but hey, we're super excited. We're kicking off our fall series this week, and we are calling the series Write This Down. And so if you notice when you came in, there's a pen on your seat, because here's kind of our assumption that as we do this series, okay, is that if God speaks something to you, because we have this crazy belief here that like part of the reason why we're gathering is because we believe that he does that if God speaks to you, we think it'd be a good idea to write it down. And so we want to make it super easy for you to do that, and we'll have different elements throughout this series that are going to help you just slow down and write it down. And what we'll do is we'll spend the next few weeks studying a book of the Bible, and the book is 1 Peter. Okay, so we're going to walk through it verse by verse, and we're really excited about this book in particular because it addresses a group of people that we all have something in common with. And I can say that because I would just assume that you're probably like me, and that at one point or another in your life, you have felt left out. That maybe there was a season in your life where you felt maybe like an outsider. Maybe it felt like everybody was doing something and you were going in a different direction. And that's really the group of people that Peter is writing to. He's writing a letter that explains, okay, how do you walk with Jesus even when it's hard, even when you feel like you're the only person who's doing that? I mean, and if you were to look back on your life, okay, I bet that each of us could probably think of situations where we've been left out. If you go back to maybe your elementary days, because this is the back to school thing, I've met a lot of people and they have the same story, okay, and this is it. So I took this test in like first or second grade to be part of the gifted and talented program, and the teacher told me I just missed it by a couple of points, right? Like everyone kind of has some version of that story, except for me. No one ever asked me to take that test. Like none of my teachers ever were like, hey, gifted, so I'm neither gifted nor talented. So if you didn't make it, it's okay, we're in this together. But I mean, like, you're like, and then probably like one of your buddies gets in the group and they're like, they get mad at you at some time and they're like, you wouldn't understand because, well, you're not in kites. Or something like that where they would say that. Like you felt left out. Maybe that wasn't your thing because you didn't care, but maybe for you it was like a sports team. You worked super hard, you put in the work, you wanted to make the team, you do the tryout, and you don't make the team. Or even worse, maybe you make the team, but you just sit the bench, and you're sitting there the whole time aware of this reality that everyone's better than you, but you still have to go to practice too. They get to play, you get to watch. That was middle school for me. Maybe that wasn't your story, but this is a very niche example that not everyone's going to get it, but those who get it, it's going to be a warm blanket to your soul. There was this thing called MySpace back in the day, okay? It was popular. It was really popular for about 2.5 years. And they had this tool on MySpace where you could rank your friends. And in this ranking, they had like top friends, okay? So there was like the top 8. Like and it was super awkward. Again, this is only really niche to a few people, but those who it's niche to, they're tracking with me right now. You would get on, you'd put someone in your top 8, then you would go and check their top 8, and you weren't in there, and you'd feel like an idiot. Yeah, it's hard. And then you're like, well, what do I do? Who do I put in my top? Like, and that was kind of this challenge you had to do. You had to deal with the fact that you felt a little left out. Or maybe it's this one, and this one's real, and this is probably most of us. If you've ever had that situation in your life where thanks to social media or thanks to knowing what's going on, you realize that a group of your friends got together, they did something, and they, for whatever reason, forgot to invite you. And it seems like they had a good time without you. And you see it all over the pictures, and you just feel strange. That we all probably have experienced this whole thing of just yeah, I've been left out. Because there are seasons in your life where it doesn't matter how great you might be, where you feel like you're alone. And that's the group that Peter's writing to in his letter. And what is true of them is also true of us. And here in the first two verses of this letter, what we're going to find is that this is a couple verses that a lot of people are going to skip over. But it is loaded with information that God can use to speak to us in those seasons of our lives where we look around and we wonder where everyone's at. Let me read it to you. This is 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 1. It says this, is Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to those who are elect exiles of the dispersion in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia, according to the foreknowledge of God the Father, in the sanctification of the Spirit, for obedience to Jesus Christ and the sprinkling with his blood. May grace and peace be multiplied to you. Now, before we get into some of the tensions that are here in the text, I just want to give a little bit of background to this book since we're going to be here for a little bit. And I want to draw your attention to just those parts that are underlined there. Okay, so this is Peter. This is written by Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ. And the reason why Peter uses that title, okay, because here's what he's saying. To the first century reader who is reading this book, he's saying, hey guys, yeah, I'm that Peter. He's like, I'm not just like Pete from Narnia. I'm that Peter. I was one of the 12. He's like, hey, I just want you to know, like, I'm Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ. You've probably heard versions of my story. And maybe you're here and you're kind of like new to this whole thing. And so why is he significant? Well, he has a very important role that Peter plays in the New Testament church. That Peter's this guy who his relationship with Jesus started on a boat. He's just at work one day fishing because that's how he makes his living. And Jesus just happens to walk by him and he sees him and he says, hey, Peter, why don't you leave everything that you have and follow me? And so what Peter does is he hops off that boat, leaves his profession behind, leaves his source of income, and he follows this Jesus guy. And that's really how his story started. But then what happens with Peter is as he builds his relationship with Jesus, he becomes one of his apostles. And there are two groups of apostles, and there's a group that's the inner three. And Peter's one of the guys who's part of that group. That there's the 12 that follow him, and then there's 3 that get to follow him places that the others don't get to follow him. Peter gets to follow him there. And so he gets to see 2 things that most of the other ones didn't get to see. One of them is that Peter is taken up on a mountain with Jesus. And he watches Jesus' form change before his eyes. And afterwards, Jesus has a conversation with Moses from the Old Testament and Elijah from the Old Testament. Peter got to watch that happen. That not only did he get to watch that, but Jesus also, on the night that he was betrayed, he brought Peter with him so that Peter could watch him pray. That at this point, as Peter's writing this letter, he's in Rome, being persecuted by a guy named Nero. That he's one of the primary leaders in the church. That he's a guy who really has accomplished some stuff. But because we know that he's that Peter, we also know that part of being that Peter is that you got some high highs and you got some low lows. That Peter's the guy who on the night Jesus was betrayed looked at Jesus and said, Jesus, everyone can abandon you, but I won't. And Jesus looks at him and he says, I tell you the truth. Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. And 3 times while Jesus is hanging on the cross, one of his inner 3, Peter, says that he doesn't even know who he is when he needed him the most. That Peter's this guy who has this unique distinction, that though he's part of the three, that he has this situation where Jesus is teaching something, and Peter takes him aside, and he says, hey, Jesus, what you're saying is cute, but it's not true. And Jesus looks at him and he says, get behind me, Satan. And so if Jesus calls you Satan, that's not a place you want to be, and that's something that Peter had to deal with. And so he's had some high highs, he's had some low lows, but what this letter shows us is it shows us that even though that's true, that at the end of the day, like all of us who have high highs and low lows in our relationship with Jesus, we should try to be like Peter, because with Peter it eventually stuck. That eventually becomes something that shaped him. And it shaped him in such a way that he would be able to write this letter to a group of people who are exiled, who are on the outs, who don't feel at home. And he writes this to them as a way to encourage them. I'm going to show a map of just kind of where this letter went. And it's got the different places there. And it really, the only reason why it's interesting is each of those cities are Gentile. Okay, so up until this point in early Christian history, that pretty much, if you were a Christian, you were first a Jew. And Peter's writing to this place right here to a group of people who don't have Jewish descent. That they don't have the same story that everyone in the church had up until this point, but they came to know Jesus later in life, and he changed them in a unique way. And it's super important as we look at the tensions that we face today in our text. And so what I want to do is I want to show you three tensions that are here in the text that they had to manage, and that also that will apply to us as we try to effectively walk with Christ in this world. So going back there to that first verse, it says, to those who are elect exiles. And the first tension that we see is that these are chosen people, but they are also exiles. That they are chosen people and they are exiles. So to those who are elect exiles of the dispersion. Okay, that phrase, elect exiles, is weird. Like it's weird. Like it's weird for us if we really think about it, and it's actually kind of weird if you think about it in history. That in ancient Christian and ancient Jewish literature, 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 1 is the only time that you see that phrase put together. That word elect, it can also be translated chosen. So what Peter's doing is he's writing to this group of people who are Gentiles, which is an interesting place to be in a religion that was started by a Jewish carpenter. But they've put their faith in this Jesus, and they really feel like second-class citizens. They feel like they're not as important as their Jewish brothers and sisters. And what Peter is saying to them is he's saying, it's not true. That just like God chose the people of Israel, he also chose you. You think that the only reason why this is happening is because the people of Israel rejected me, and so we're just going for the Gentiles. What Peter wants them to see is he wants them to see that no, you were not God's plan B. But from the very beginning of time, when he created the world, he knew that he would save these people too. And these people who feel like outsiders in the Christian community, what Peter is saying is he's saying, you are no outsider. But that God chose you. That you are elect. And so that means that if you were to look back at the Old Testament, and you were to see how God delivered his people, how God fought for his people, how God cared for his people, that those promises for them are now applied to you. That you are no second-class citizen, that you are no plan B. But this is what I wanted to do from the very beginning. So he draws attention to the fact that they're elect. But in the same way that they are elect, they are also exiled. That in the same way that God chose them and he wants to bless them and he wants to help them, they are also a group of people who are exiled. And if you are a person who feels on the outs, I mean, think of those times in your life where you've been left out. Do you feel like anyone has chosen you? That these two terms, they don't seem to go together. But what Peter is drawing attention to is though they might seem like their attention, that when you walk with Jesus, you can be chosen by God. That can be the reality that you know to be true, but you can also look around and feel alone. And I would guess that here this morning, some of you, that is the tension in your life that you're dealing with. You're like, I know God loves me. But gosh, there's a lot of things I would change about this circumstance. I know that God cares, but it really doesn't feel like that right now. And if I had to interpret my circumstances, I would guess there's probably nothing about me that feels elect. That there's nothing about me that feels chosen. And what Peter's doing is he's drawing our attention and he's saying, when you follow Jesus, you cannot let your circumstances define you. That you cannot let your circumstances color what you think about God. That your circumstances, that you might be in exile, you might be alone, nothing might be going your way, but it doesn't actually change what God feels about you. That Peter very just astutely, he puts those words together for you. So that instead of coming up with all the reasons why you're alone, all the reasons why you don't matter, all the reasons why your circumstances is telling you something about the way God thinks about you, he puts them together so that you can know that no matter what you walk through, no matter how alone you might feel, it actually doesn't change anything about how God feels about you. Circumstances are just circumstances and they change. So it's this tension that we manage. That you are chosen, but you are also in exile. And then we see this other tension in the text. And it's really along those same lines, but it's really more of like the other side of that coin, and it's that we are in this world, that we live in this world, but we are not of this world. That there are parts of us that we live in this world, like football season's coming and we're excited about it, but we're not of it. That there are going to be things that are about us, if we belong to Him, that are going to scream, this isn't my home. That my calling is different. That I live here, but I'm just passing through. That my citizenship, yep, right now it is in the 417, but there will come a day where my citizenship will be in the heaven. See what I did there? I just rhymed that on the spot. And if it rhymes, you know that it's true. I mean, so look at that verse. Okay, so I want to underline another word there. And to the elect exiles of the dispersion. And that is such an interesting word, okay? And here's what makes it so interesting. that word never refers to Gentiles. Never. That anytime you see that word in the Bible or you see it in like ancient Christian literature, that it's always referring to Jewish people who have been forced out of their homes because of persecution. Well, First Peter is written to Gentiles, and it's written to Gentiles who haven't had to leave anything. That it's written to Gentiles who got saved in their home and are blooming where they're planted. Yet Peter says, of the dispersion. And so here's what that communicates to us, okay? Is that there are going to be times when you walk with Jesus, when you follow him and you are home and surrounded by your people, where you still feel like you don't fit. That there are going to be times where you are in the places where you think that you belong. And even though there are parts of you that belong there, there are going to always be parts of you that stand out. That Peter is using that word to draw attention to the reader. And he's saying, don't get so comfortable. What's probably happening is they put their faith in Jesus and years have passed. And as years have passed, they're starting to look around and see things are different. That maybe some of the friends that they had when they first became Christians, like those relationships aren't as strong. That maybe some of the things that they used to do that they thought were really great, now they're starting to feel this conviction. And they're realizing, okay, maybe there's something about my life that needs to change. And I would guess that because of that word dispersion that they've changed. And because they have changed, because they have a different standard, a different priority, they are looking around, and though they are home, they feel left out. Though they are home, it isn't what it used to be like. And Peter points a little bit of attention at this later on in his letter here, and I want to read it to you. It's in 1 Peter 4, verse 4, and it's talking about like sinful acts that these people used to participate in, but they've stopped doing. And this is what he says. He says, with respect to this, they are surprised when you do not join them in the same flood of debauchery and they malign you. And he's like, people are seeing that you're not doing the things that you used to do, and no one's giving you a high five. People are calling you names. And here's the trick, is everyone in this room has the same calling. That we are called to help people know Jesus better. That we are called to know Jesus better ourselves. And there's this really difficult tension as we try to reflect Jesus in this world. That we are to be here and involved and show care. But at the same time, we have to be aware that as we do that, we're often not going to be walking in the path of least resistance. That there are going to be moments where we have to stand out, but we have to be careful not to do so in such a way where people never want to listen to what we have to say. And it's a tension. Because on the one hand, you're like, yeah, I don't fit in. Yeah, I don't believe that. Yeah, I'm different. Yeah, I'm not going to do what I used to do. But on the other hand, you are called to help people know Jesus better. And so you have to figure out, as you manage that tension, how God would want you to do that. I like the way I like the way Paul says it in his letter to Colossians, and it illustrates like our role in the world and how we help people know Jesus better. And he says this, he says, let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you might know how to answer each person. That word always there, it means always. that your speech should always be gracious. If I could say one thing about this generation, this social media age where everyone has keyboard courage, we could not be worse at this. And here's what I'm afraid of. That at times we become so concerned with being seasoned with salt. That we become so concerned with people knowing where we stand and what we are against. That we completely ignore that part that's always being gracious. And we think we're doing God a service by making everyone hate him. Like, oh, well, no one's commented on this news leader article yet, and then we get on there and we're like, hey, come to New Life. And they're like, oh, wait, never. And in our attempt to help people know Jesus better, what we're doing, because we're not being gracious, is we're making people hate him even more than they already do. There is a way to take a stand. There is a way to speak up. And as we look at these people who Peter's writing to, I think they would find some of the things we do to be very ironic. Because it's almost like at times, as the church, we're seeking ways for people to persecute us. It's going to happen naturally. We're going to stand out. That we should take a stand. That people need to know. But there's a way that we can do it where people might actually listen to what you have to say. So there's that side, and then there's the other side, where we're so concerned with being gracious that we're in that setting where God has put us, and we can speak up, and we've been asked what we think, and we're so afraid to take the stand that we're just quiet. And both of those extremes are harmful. Both of those extremes are not what he's calling for. What Peter is advocating for, and what Paul is saying as we live in this world, but not of this world, we have got to be full of grace, but also seasoned with salt. Notice that it's full, the grace is full, the salt is seasoned. Think of that in relationship to how you should respond. And then the last tension we see here in the text is we see this tension between grace and obedience. And sometimes in the church we think that these things go at odds with each other. They really don't. It's really just hand in glove. But I like the way that Peter draws attention to both as he finishes out this first greeting in his letter. Let me read it to you here. He says, "For obedience to Jesus Christ and for the sprinkling with his blood, may grace and peace be multiplied with you." So here you have Peter. He's talking about obedience and grace. I find this so fascinating. Going back to the fact that we were chosen. You know why God chose you? He chose you because he wanted to show you grace. That he chose you because he wanted to forgive you. And we show God how we want to respond to that by our obedience. Our response to God's grace and what he's done in our hearts, that it's obedience. And to the level with which we obey, it shows the level with which we have been impacted by that grace. And that little line there, sprinkling with his blood, it's super interesting to me because a lot of commentators, what they believe is they believe that that is referring back to Leviticus chapter 14. And thinking about this as a group of people who were on the outside of community, okay? And in Leviticus 14, what's happening is there would be a member of the community who was not allowed to be part of the community because of defilement. Well, Leviticus 14, it describes a ceremony where that person who was on the outside of community would be sprinkled with blood by the priest, and that sprinkling would cleanse them in such a way that they would be able to have fellowship inside of the community. And so for us, that we are a chosen people who have no business being a chosen people, but we're able to be that because if your faith is in Jesus, he has sprinkled you with his blood. And that sprinkling, it gives you hope that your sins have been forgiven and paid for. And it also gives you confidence that you have a place in the community of God. That because we've been sprinkled and we have been brought in, that our lives, because of the grace of God, that they don't have to be characterized by this fear of judgment, this lifestyle that is marred by sin, but instead, because we have been sprinkled, that a debt has been forgiven and a price has been paid. And our response to that gift is obedience. But as I think about these people, just kind of as I land this morning, I think about this. There is not a better way to live your life than one that is in exile. And the reason why is because people, right? But there are going to be moments in your life where it feels like everything is going your way, that you couldn't be happier. And then someone is going to do something. And just like that, everything that you thought was so secure is now gone. That to build your life in a way on this world and to put a priority on it greater than it should, it is like building your life on a stack of cards. There might be moments where that's okay. But when the wind comes, you will fall. And if that's your hope and that's your foundation, it is going to hurt really, really badly. And so what Peter wants you to see is he wants you to see, hey, there's something better. There is something better to build your life on. That there is something more secure. People are going to exile you. People are going to frustrate you. But here's what you can know about God. He chose you. He chose you to be His. We're going to get here in a couple weeks, but I want to read it to you because I think it's beautiful. And this is for you. If you feel on the outs, if you feel frustrated about your situation in life, here's what you need to know. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 10. This is your story if you are in Christ. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Yeah, once you were an outsider. Yep, once you were alone. Yep, once you had to live this life on your own strength. But not anymore. Because you're His. That once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Yep, there was a season in your life where you weren't forgiven. where yep, you had to carry the weight of that sin and you just never knew if it was going to be gone. But because of Christ, that is not your story anymore. And my fear for us, my fear for me, is that because we live in this constant struggle, this constant tension of being in and out of exile, is that we're going to abandon the one who loves us so much no matter what for the opinion of those who will continue to waver. That Peter is saying, put your faith on him. It is secure. Yeah, hard times are going to come. You're not always going to know what's going on. But once you were not a people, but now you are. You're God's chosen people. Once you didn't receive mercy, but now because of Christ, it's yours. Let's pray.
Thank you for watching our services. If you have questions or you would like more information, you can visit us online at nlspringfield.com. We'd also love to have you join us at one of our Sunday morning services. We have programs at 9:30 and 11 for adults, students, and kids. We hope to see you there.